Okay, so yesterday we started chapter 7. I still haven't graded your last test, my bad. Hopefully I can do that while helping people with their quiz today. In chapter 7, there were some key vocab words you've got to know. One of them is ratio. Another one is proportion. And you have to know how to cross multiply. We talked about that while chapter 7 seems like the most useful for real life because, you might actually want to calculate someone's baseball batting average. It seems the most useful. But because it is useful, there are a lot of word problems, so you've got to pay very careful attention. In fact, someone in a different class period, we did this this problem yesterday, which had 521 and 181, and we had no problems. But I had someone in a different class period try to put 2006 in their fraction. So be careful. They sometimes give you extra numbers to throw you off. Okay, as for the bell ringer, you could, worst comes to worst, plug in each of these exponents. So you could do 8 times 2 to the negative 1/3 plus 1 and figure out what that number is. And you could do 4 to the 1 minus 1/3. Oh, I'm not able to see my stuff. Why is that? There we go. Good grief. Okay, so you could plug in negative 1/3 into each side of the equation. You could see what number you get in your calculator. And if the numbers match, then that would be the answer choice. But this would take a lot of work. And you would have to go through each of them to see. There is a faster way. But it involves exponents, and you would have to remember that the big number like the 8 is called the base, and then the tiny number above is called an exponent. If we can have the same base on both sides, we can set them equal to each other to begin with. So we had 8 to the 2x plus 1. I know that 2 squared is the same thing as 4. So I can replace that 4 to the 1 minus x with 2 squared. I would love to replace the 8 with some other thing involving a 2. That way I could just set them equal to each other. So does anyone know their exponents when it comes to 2's? It is 2 to the 3rd. Thank you, Ayana. Okay, so 2 to the 3rd is the same thing as 8. And 2 squared is the same thing as 4. So I'm just going to substitute, that you do understand, in those 2's with exponents instead of using an 8 and a 4. Okay, and now we're going to have to recall some of our exponent rules. When you raise something to an exponent, like I see I'm raising a power to a power, what are you supposed to do with the exponents? Are you supposed to add? Are you supposed to multiply? You are. If you have x squared times x to the 3rd, you add and get x to the 5th. But we're not doing that. We're doing like x squared raised to the 3rd. And that's x to the 6th. You actually multiply. So we need to multiply. So we'll do, and I'm going to ignore the 2's from now on because we agree they already had the 2's in common. So I'm going to have 3 times 2x plus 1 and 2 times 4 minus x. I get 6x plus 3 because I distribute equals 8 minus 2x. If I add 2x to both sides, I'll have 8x. If I subtract 3, I'll have 8x equals 5. Unless my math is wrong today, which it has been, let's face it, lately. Why did I write 2? Shouldn't that be 1 minus x? And that should be a 1. In the given problem, wasn't it 1 minus x, 1 minus x, 1 minus x? So this should be a 2. And that explains my issue. Why did no one fix it? You know, if you can catch me faster, I would give you candy. Plus, then I look less silly. Okay, which means I had 8x plus 3 equals 2. So I'll have 8x equals negative 1. So x equals negative 1/8. So the answer is C. Again, if you didn't follow that and you did not understand what I just did with getting us on the same base and then using some rules of exponents, you were supposed to have learned that in Algebra 1. But if you didn't follow, I know Catherine had asked me if it was okay if you just plug in the answer choices. Of course, plug them in, see which one works. If I was a guessing woman, and you know sometimes I am when it comes to standardized test questions, I would have guessed A, B, or C because they were all negative. I wouldn't have guessed D or E because they weren't negative. I would have guessed A, B, or C. And just because I like patterns, I see 4 and 8 and I know they're multiples, so I either would have guessed B or C. I'll give you that one was a doozy and a bit much for a Friday. I'm not the bell ringer maker at the moment. Thank God. Well, meanwhile, the next one seems like a geometry question. So hopefully that one will go a little better and a little faster and a little less deer in the headlight. It says in the figure below, we have a triangle and they give us coordinates. And what is the area? Well, how do you calculate the area of a triangle? Is it? Base times height and then what else? Over 2. So base times height over 2. So I've got to figure out the length of the base. I've got to figure out the height. And I got to divide it by 2 apparently. Figuring out the length of the base, that's going to be pretty easy. From 1 to 5, how many units did I go over? 4. So my base is 4. I know that much. That one I could count. But figuring out that pink dotted line going up, that might take a few minutes. That might take a few minutes. Are there any thoughts on how to do that this early on a Friday?
Could you use the distance?
That would be one way to do it. What are we using the distance formula on?
A and B.
A and is that going to give us that dotted line then? What would be halfway in between? Well, that's not going to work either. I like it, Ayana. It was moving somewhere. Let's do that. Ayana would do the distance between A and B. So that would be the square root of x2 minus x1. So 5 minus 4 squared plus 3 minus 5 squared. This was her idea. I don't think it's a bad one. So 1 squared plus a negative 2 squared. So I've got 1 plus 4, which is the square root of 5. So this side is the square root of 5. And since she started that, you know I can't stand for that third side to be blank, so let's figure out the length of that third side too. AC, using the distance formula, would be 4 minus 1 squared plus 5 minus 3 squared, and I would get 3 squared, which is 9, and 2 squared, which is 4, so I get square root of 13. But that still does not give me that pink dotted line. Mm-mm-mm. Oh, I drew that in. I'm assuming things. I also kind of wanted to assume that this was 3, 3. But you know what happens when you assume in life. So I'm not even sure if that's right either. I know a way to do it, but it involves stuff we haven't learned yet.
Answer's A.
Mm-mm.
Isn't it?
Mm-mm.
If you subtract the top point of the triangle from the bottom coordinates, like the lowest 9.
Yeah, and I know you get 1, but no.
You get 4.
No. The answer's not A. You know, if you had to guess the answer, genuinely guess the answer, what answer choice would you guess?
Probably not A.
Probably not A. I feel like it's pointing to the right answer. What is the right answer? Say it again? Yeah, it's B. Because there's a lot of square root of 2s, the 4s kept happening a lot, and the answer's B. But at least me and myself, and I would like some math to back that up. So 1, 2 squared is 4, square root of 5. I can't make it work. I know how to make it go, but it involves something we haven't learned yet. And I'm really surprised they put this on here because we do a whole chapter on area and volume later on. So I think this is supposed to be square root of 2. That can't be right. 2 square roots of 2 would be 8 square roots of 2 over 2. Which gives you 4 square roots of 2. So it needs to be 2 square roots of 2. I know that much. I don't know. I went to REL. I know the answer is B. I'm like 98% sure. But do I have math that you and I have learned recently to back that up? Not so much. And do we have other things we need to move on to? Of course. So we're going to move on. Letting go. Moving on to what we were talking about yesterday. Okay. So we talked about a ratio with a fraction. And then we talked about a proportion with 2 ratios with an equal sign in between. And then we did some that were already set up for us. And then we get to number 8, and we got to set up our own. This is how it would look on the test, where you're given a word problem, and you have to set up your own proportion. Meaning Gage needs to set up his own fractions with an equal sign in between. He needs 2 fractions with an equal to sign. That's why we need to remember what a proportion is, so he knows what he's looking for. Okay, since I'm picking on Gage, he'll read for me. Will you read 8 for me?
If the ratio of boys to girls at a high school is 4 to 3, and there are 936 boys, how many girls are at the high school?
Okay, so ratio, who needs to go on top in my fraction? Boys. It says boys to girls, so I'm going to do boys to girls. I'm just going to write that as a reference. I'm not actually going to use that in my work. That's just to make sure I've set everything up correctly. Okay, so let's plug in some numbers. Do I put the 4 in the denominator or the numerator? If it was set up as boys to girls, and then they said 4 to 3, if boys came first and then girls came second, shouldn't it be 4 over 3? Okay, and then I'm going to set up another fraction, but I only have one number. Do I put the 936 in the numerator, or do I put the 936 in the denominator? Numerator, because it says boys. So 936. And then what do I do in math class when I don't know what to put somewhere? An X. And then just like yesterday, we will cross multiply. So I will have 4x equals, I need someone to tell me that, 2,808. So x equals 702. Okay, if you follow that one, that's really about as difficult as it gets with us. That's what the next ones are going to be about. So I have up here an Eiffel Tower. Obviously, this is not a real Eiffel Tower. We've been scaled down. And I have up here, someone did their city project super duper tiny. Obviously, in real life, a city cannot be held in Miss Compton's hands. So when we make models and we want them to be realistic, we have to scale them down. and that's called using a scale factor. So our next blank is scale factor. Because I get that I don't have the real Eiffel Tower, but the dimensions of my Eiffel Tower match the dimensions of the real Eiffel Tower, or at least I assume. Okay, so a scale factor is it's a ratio, and of course it's in simplest form because it's a fraction. And you always want the length of the model first in the ratio. Make sure you're using the same units before you reduce the fraction. That would probably be the most important keywords. Same units before you reduce. So if you're given inches and feet, you're going to need to make them both inches or make them both feet before you do any math. I'm telling my own secrets. Okay, so I always do model in the numerator and actual in the denominator. So like think of you could have told me my paper is super good. I think of my model Eiffel Tower versus the real Eiffel Tower. And in fact, I normally write that first to help me stay on the same page. So model over actual. Model over actual. And it helps me set up my proportions and everything correctly. Okay, it says the miniature replica of a 1923 checker cab is 6.5 inches. The actual car length of the car was 13 feet. What is the scale factor? So first things first, do we have the same units? No, one is in inches and one is in feet. So what's the easiest thing to do? How many inches are in a foot? 12. So let's multiply 13 times 12, and you get some number. 156 inches. Okay, so the model was how long? 6.5 inches. And the actual is, we just calculated, it's 156 inches. And then, obviously, since we have started off with decimals, I would be okay with a decimal. You could move this over one and have 65 over 1560. But it's seriously okay with me if you just jump straight to the decimal for this one, because it did give you a decimal to begin with. I understand if you're given decimals, you can't make lemonade out of oranges. You got to go with what you're given. So if they give you decimals, your answer can be in decimals. Okay, so what's 65 divided by 1560? Okay, so we're going to do 0.04. 1. Because I told you I like 3. Okay, and then we get to our last problem of the day, and then Miss Compton swears she will stop talking. If a math scale is, that symbol means inch, so is 1 inch equal to 50 miles, and the distance between point A and B is 3.5 inches, how many miles apart are point A and B? Well, I'm actually going to set up 2 different fractions this time. I'm going to do a proportion. I know they told me 1 inch was to 50 miles. And they told me between A and B it was 3.5 inches. And then they asked how many miles, so I'm going to put an X there. When you cross multiply, you end up getting X equals, I would love a number, 175 miles. Okay, so number 10 to me would be the most real life useful. Well, I say that, and no one actually uses a map anymore. Everyone uses a GPS. But I'm old enough where, well, I didn't drive at least, but we'll pretend I'm old enough where I've at least seen a map. Probably so have you. And it looks